James Carter had lived in his quiet suburban neighborhood for over a decade. As a retired firefighter, he valued peace and community. But ever since Karen Wilkins moved in next door, that peace had been shattered. It started small. Side-eye glances, passive-aggressive comments about his lawn, and a cold attitude whenever they crossed paths. But things escalated when Karen fixated on his mailbox. At first, James thought it was an accident. One morning, he found his mailbox knocked over, its wooden post split at the base. He assumed a careless driver had clipped it. Shrugging it off, he replaced it with a new one. But then it happened again and again. Each time, James woke up to find his mailbox smashed to the ground, as if someone had taken a bat to it. He even installed a camera, but it mysteriously stopped working the night before each incident. The police were little help. "Unless you have solid evidence, there's not much we can do," they told him. James was frustrated, but refused to give Karen the reaction she wanted. "If she thinks she can bully me into moving, she's got another thing coming," he muttered. So he replaced his mailbox once more, this time with a reinforced wooden post. Surely that would stop her. But one night, as James sat in his living room, he heard the unmistakable sound of something splintering outside. He rushed to the window and saw Karen storming back to her house, a baseball bat in hand. His new mailbox lay in pieces. James clenched his jaw. Enough was enough. It was time for a new plan, one that Karen wouldn't see coming. James stood at his window, watching Karen retreat into her house like nothing had happened. His heart pounded with frustration. This wasn't just about a mailbox anymore. It was about respect, about standing his ground. The next morning, he walked outside and inspected the damage. Splinters of wood scattered across his driveway. The base of the post was completely destroyed, a clear sign that Karen had used full force. His neighbors walked by, shaking their heads. "She's got issues," said Mr. Thompson, the elderly man from across the street. "You should call the cops again." James sighed. "They won't do anything without proof." Karen's window blinds twitched. He knew she was watching, probably smirking at his frustration. That's when an idea hit him. Instead of calling the police again or replacing the mailbox with another fragile wooden post, James decided to change the game entirely. If Karen wanted to break his mailbox, he'd give her one she'd never forget. That afternoon, James visited a hardware store and loaded his truck with supplies: concrete, steel plates, and rebar. He worked late into the night, digging deep into the ground, securing a thick steel pole, and surrounding it with solid concrete. He then attached a reinforced steel mailbox, one that could withstand a sledgehammer, let alone a bat. By the time he was done, his new mailbox looked ordinary, but it was anything but. James wiped sweat from his brow and smiled. "Let's see her try to smash this one." Little did he know, Karen wasn't done yet, and when she came back, she was in for the shock of her life. The next evening, Karen strutted outside like clockwork. She glanced toward James' house and smirked. Destroying his mailbox had become routine, almost a game to her. Armed with her trusty metal bat, she walked over to the curb, expecting to hear the usual satisfying crack of wood splitting apart. But tonight was different. She gripped the bat tightly, took a deep breath, and swung with full force. Clang! A loud, metallic thud echoed through the neighborhood. The vibration shot up her arms, numbing her hands instantly. She gasped, stumbling backward. The bat slipped from her grip and clattered onto the pavement. "What the hell?" she muttered, shaking her fingers, trying to get the feeling back. She scowled at the mailbox. It hadn't even budged. Not a single dent. It stood there, untouched, as if mocking her. Furious, she picked up the bat again and swung even harder. Clang! This time the force ricocheted through her arms so violently that she yelped in pain and dropped the bat again. Her knuckles throbbed. She looked around, hoping no one had seen, but a few neighbors peeked from their windows, whispering among themselves. From his front porch, James leaned against the railing, sipping his coffee. "Problem, Karen?" he called out, a smirk tugging at his lips. Karen's face burned with embarrassment. You did something to this mailbox," she accused, pointing a shaky finger at him. James shrugged. "Just making sure it follows regulations. Didn't realize you were so invested in my property." Karen clenched her fists. She wasn't going to let this go. If brute force wouldn't work, she'd find another way to get back at James. And next time, she wouldn't be alone. Karen stormed back into her house, rubbing her sore hands. That mailbox had humiliated her in front of the entire neighborhood, and James, standing there, smirking at her, made it even worse. She wasn't just going to let this go. If she couldn't destroy the mailbox herself, she'd make sure James paid for what he did. Grabbing her phone, she scrolled through her contacts until she found the number she was looking for. Dialing. After a few rings, a gruff voice answered. "Yeah? Tom, it's Karen," she said, lowering her voice. "I need a favor." Tom was her cousin, built like a linebacker and always up for trouble. If anyone could handle that steel monstrosity James had put up, it was him. "What kind of favor?" Tom asked. Karen gritted her teeth. "Some idiot in my neighborhood put up an illegal mailbox. I need it taken care of." Tom chuckled. "Illegal, huh? You sure this isn't just you causing trouble again?" "Just come by tonight," she snapped. "I'll pay you." Tom sighed. All right. I'll bring my truck. If that thing's coming down, we're doing it right." Karen hung up, a satisfied grin on her face. James thought he was clever, but she would show him. By morning, that mailbox would be gone, and he wouldn't be able to prove a thing. Outside, James sat on his porch, watching Karen's house. He had a feeling she wasn't done yet. And he was right. As the clock struck midnight, Karen peeked through her blinds, waiting. The street was quiet, with only the occasional flicker of a streetlight breaking the darkness. Then, the low rumble of an engine echoed down the block. Tom's pickup truck rolled up in front of James's house, its headlights off. Tom stepped out, cracking his knuckles. He was a burly man with a reputation for handling problems without asking too many questions. Karen rushed outside to meet him. "The mailbox is right there," she whispered, pointing at the steel structure standing defiantly by the curb. Tom scoffed. "That thing looks like a fortress." Karen crossed her arms. "Can you handle it or not?" Tom chuckled and walked over, tapping the steel with his knuckle. "Yeah, I got this." He waved toward his truck. "Give me a sec." From the back of his truck, Tom pulled out a heavy-duty sledgehammer. Karen's eyes gleamed with anticipation. "Let's see how tough this thing really is," Tom muttered. Bang! The first hit echoed through the street. Bang! The mailbox didn't even dent. Karen's excitement turned to frustration. "Harder!" she hissed. Tom adjusted his grip and swung again. Bang! But the mailbox stood firm, refusing to budge. From across the street, a porch light flicked on. "Hey, what's going on out there?" A neighbor's voice rang out. Karen grabbed Tom's arm. "We need to go, now!" Tom cursed under his breath and threw the sledgehammer back into his truck. They jumped inside just as another light turned on, this time at James's house. As the truck peeled away, James stepped onto his porch, watching their taillights vanish. A knowing smirk spread across his face. "Nice try, Karen," he muttered. "But you just made a big mistake." The next morning, James sat on his porch with a cup of coffee, watching the sunrise. He had barely taken a sip when his phone buzzed. It was an alert from his security system. With a smirk, he opened the app and scrolled through the footage from last night. As expected, the motion-activated cameras had captured everything. Karen sneaking out, Tom's arrival, the attempted destruction of the steel mailbox, and their panicked escape when the neighbors stirred. James shook his head. They really thought that would work? He chuckled and hit the download button, saving the video. Then, an idea formed in his mind. He opened his laptop and logged on to the neighborhood's community Facebook group. "James, woke up to something interesting this morning. Seems like some folks just can't take no for an answer. Thought I'd share." He attached the video and hit post. Within minutes, the reactions started pouring in. "OMG, Karen again! That mailbox is built like a tank. Respect. Someone, get this woman under control. Wait, is that Tom, the guy who works at the hardware store? LMAO. James sat back, watching the comments pile up. Meanwhile, across the street, Karen's phone started buzzing nonstop. She groggily reached for it, rubbing her eyes. When she saw the notifications, her stomach dropped. Karen, tagged in post by James, "When your neighbor invests in security cameras, oops." Her hands trembled as she tapped the video. Watching herself and Tom get caught in the act was like a nightmare she couldn't wake up from. A loud knock on her door snapped her out of it. Heart pounding, she rushed to open it. Standing there was her husband, Mark, face red with anger, phone in hand, video playing. "Karen," he growled, What the hell did you do last night? Karen's heart pounded as she stared at Mark's furious expression. He stepped inside, shutting the door behind him. His grip tightened around his phone as the video of her and Tom played again. Explain this, he demanded. Right now. Karen's mind raced. Mark, it's not what it looks like. Oh, so you didn't sneak out in the middle of the night to vandalize James's mailbox? You didn't drag Tom into this? Because it sure looks like that to me. Mark's voice rose, his frustration barely contained. Karen swallowed hard. It's just that mailbox. It's an eyesore. It ruins the whole street's look. I was only trying to. Mark cut her off. No, you were trying to get revenge, Karen, and now the whole neighborhood knows what kind of person you are. People are talking about this online, laughing at you. Karen grabbed her phone and opened Facebook. The post had exploded, hundreds of comments, shares, even memes. Someone had taken a screenshot of her shocked face from the video and added the caption, "When you realize your neighbor is smarter than you." Her stomach twisted. She clenched her fists. That man humiliated me. He did this on purpose. Mark shook his head. No, you did this to yourself, and now I have to deal with the consequences. Karen frowned. What do you mean? Mark exhaled, rubbing his temples. The HOA president called me this morning. They're talking about fines, Karen, possible legal action. You damaged someone's property, and now James has proof. Karen's breath hitched. She hadn't considered the legal side of things. But it was just a mailbox. No, it was his mailbox, and you won't stop messing with him. Just then, her phone rang. She glanced down and felt her stomach drop. It was the police. Karen's hands trembled as she stared at the caller ID. The police. Her throat tightened. She glanced at Mark, who crossed his arms, his expression unreadable. You should answer that, he said firmly. Heart pounding, Karen swiped to accept the call. Hello? Mrs. Adams? A deep voice asked. Yes, this is she said, forcing her voice to remain calm. This is Officer Reynolds with the local police department. We received a report about a vandalism incident on your street. The homeowner, James Carter, has provided security footage. We'd like to speak with you regarding the matter. Are you available to come down to the station today? Karen's mouth went dry. She hadn't expected this to escalate so quickly. She stammered, do I need a lawyer? That's your choice, ma'am. We just have a few questions, Officer Reynolds replied, his tone professional but firm. Karen gritted her teeth. This wasn't fair. James was the troublemaker, not her. But she couldn't ignore the situation now. I can come in later today. Good, we'll see you soon. The call ended. Mark let out a slow breath. So what now? Karen clenched her fists. I'll go down there and explain everything. It was just a stupid mailbox. They won't actually do anything, right? Mark looked at her like she had lost her mind. Karen, you destroyed someone's property. This isn't just about a mailbox anymore. It's about you harassing James over and over. The cops don't waste time unless there's a real case. Karen's stomach churned. She needed a plan, something to shift the blame. Maybe if she played the victim, maybe if she made James look bad. Yes, that's exactly what she needed to do. Her expression hardened. I know exactly what to say. But what she didn't know was that James had one more trick up his sleeve. Karen arrived at the police station with her head held high, rehearsing her story. She'd paint James as the aggressor, claim she felt threatened, and insist the mailbox was an eyesore that needed to be removed. But the moment she stepped inside, her confidence wavered. Officer Reynolds sat across from James Carter, who had a folder in front of him. His expression was calm, but his eyes held something unsettling, assurance. Mrs. Adams, Officer Reynolds began, take a seat. Karen forced a smile and sat. I just want to say that this is a big misunderstanding. James has been provoking me for months. His mailbox. James quietly slid the folder forward and flipped it open. Inside were printed images, clear, undeniable screenshots from the security footage. In each one, Karen was mid-swing, destroying his mailbox with a hammer. Her stomach twisted. Misunderstanding? Officer Reynolds raised an eyebrow. This footage shows repeated vandalism. You didn't just do this once. You did it several times over the past few weeks. And Mr. Carter also has witnesses. Karen's throat went dry. Witnesses? James leaned forward. My neighbors saw you and they've written statements. Karen's hands clenched into fists. How had she not considered this? Officer Reynolds sighed and leaned back. Mrs. Adams, you've been harassing Mr. Carter. Destruction of property, trespassing, and now with multiple incidents recorded, this is no longer a small case. Karen's face burned with frustration. This isn't fair. I was just... James finally spoke, his voice calm but firm. You can keep talking, Karen, but you're going to have to answer for this. For the first time, reality hit her like a brick. She wasn't in control anymore. Officer Reynolds slid a paper toward her. You have two choices. Face legal charges or settle this civilly. But either way, this stops today. Karen swallowed hard. She had finally pushed too far. Karen's hands trembled as she stared at the paper in front of her. The weight of the situation finally settled on her. This wasn't just an argument between neighbors anymore. She was facing real consequences. I didn't mean to cause trouble, she stammered, her voice barely above a whisper. Officer Reynolds leaned forward, his voice firm. Mrs. Adams, you didn't just cause trouble. You deliberately vandalized your neighbor's property multiple times. We have security footage, witness statements, and undeniable proof. This isn't going to be swept under the rug. James folded his arms. You wanted to get rid of my mailbox, Karen? Well, now the law's involved, and you're the one in trouble. Karen's face turned red with frustration, but she knew she had no way out. She could see it in Officer Reynolds' eyes. This wasn't something she could talk her way out of. What are my options? She finally asked, her voice flat. Officer Reynolds pointed to the paper in front of her. Option 1. You pay for all the damages, replace the mailbox, and issue a formal apology to Mr. Carter. You'll also be on probation for trespassing, meaning any further incident could lead to immediate jail time. Karen swallowed hard. And option 2? James smirked. We press full charges, vandalism, trespassing, harassment. You'd be looking at court dates, legal fees, and maybe even some jail time. A long silence filled the room. Karen's eyes darted between James and Officer Reynolds. She wanted to scream, to argue, to fight back, but she knew she had lost. After what felt like an eternity, she let out a heavy sigh and picked up the pen. Fine, she muttered, signing the agreement. James leaned back in his chair, satisfied. And one more thing, Karen, he said. She looked up, annoyed. What now? He grinned. That steel wall? It's staying. And if you even think about messing with it again, trust me, I'll be ready. Karen stormed out of the station, defeated. Meanwhile, James walked out feeling victorious. Justice had been served, and his message was clear. He wasn't someone to be pushed around. And as for the steel mailbox, it stood tall and unbreakable, just like him. If you enjoyed this story, make sure to like, share, and subscribe for more powerful and eye-opening content. What would you have done in James's situation? Let us know in the comments below. Justice always wins in the end. Let's spread the message.